I receive. Keep my heart so in me. And oh, what must I do to prove my love for you?
That's right, man. We are going to bring it hard and fast, man. I want to give a shout out right away to some folks that are supporting our troops, supporting our military. This is going to be a program dedicated to Memorial Day. We're going to have USMC John Rickert here in the second hour. Looking forward to that. But I want to give a shout out to Janelle and Dawn at DOD for their support and their support of all of our troops. We're grateful. And then Matt, in support of USMC, does a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and we're grateful for his work as well. And we're looking forward to this hour, man. All right.
RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Warp and Woof Radio every Wednesday morning, sponsored by the Comenius Institute. And before we get going, Dr. Eckel, why don't you explain who the Comenius Institute is? And it was represented well up in here last Wednesday.
Oh, wasn't that the truth?
Yes,
man,
it was.
We had some great folks up here. We had 3 of our students from IUPUI with us last week. And I'll tell you, HB, the podcast, it went viral with parents and grandparents.
And it should.
It should.
They respected represented well, let me say.
Absolutely
that.
Did.
Young people, man, I was so inspired and so enthused when they left because, as I say each and every day on all these programs, we always ask what's wrong, and let's look at what's right.
Let's look at what's right, exactly right.
They were beautiful, beautiful young people.
It was so much fun to have them here, and they did a great job. Comenius, this is the Comenius Institute, and our focus is on making a bridge between high school and college for young people going into IUPUI here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And specifically, it's a Christian, academic, intellectual connection for young people who need to maintain their faith all the way through college. One of the big issues we face in the church generally is that 75% of young people who go away to public university fall away from the church afterwards. And I think one of the big reasons is because they don't have any relationship with anybody who actually cares to answer their questions during that time. Warp and Woof, of course, is the vertical horizontal threads that make up fabric, and from a Christian point of view, Colossians 1:17, that's what we're all about. Jesus is the one who holds all things together for us. There's kind of an overview of who we are and what we do.
Exactly, and each and every week we go to the book of Proverbs to address our format on the show. And today's show, I was interested in wondering how are we going to tie Proverbs into Memorial Day in America, Mark Eckel. You bring it on, Mark. You're warping and whooping on this one. Let me say that.
We are going to move it and shake it here today because this is such an important issue. It should be for all of us. It certainly is for me. Let's go back to the beginning and say that the word holiday literally comes to us from the English word which means holy day, which holy means to be set apart. It's not a vacation. We don't vacate. We don't leave ourselves empty. But literally, we are setting days aside to remember them, just as much as we would do for MLK or veterans or Christmas. It's an important day for us. It's the last Monday of May every year to honor those who have died, who have given their lives for our freedom. Now, it's important to say this from time to time. And I'm going to say something that kind of might make people's hair stand up a little bit. But I'm going to say this. Shed blood makes us free citizens. I'll say that again. Shed blood makes us free citizens. We're not being warmongers, but we're being honest to what is. There is a true doctrine of depravity in human beings, that we are inherently corrupt. That we desperately need to teach history to our young people, which means we need to help them to understand what a holiday is. So, for instance, 9/11 happened 15 years ago. Some of the students I will teach this fall were infants when that happened. They need to know history. They need to know why we do what we do and why we need to keep memories alive. And if we don't teach why this is a great nation, then why would anybody want to defend it? One of the things I wrote some time ago on my website, Warp and Woof, was a piece called Defense. You can check it out, hit it on the search engine, look up Defense. And some of the things that I wrote there, for instance, have to do with the importance of our country. Here's just one statement from Anthony Esselin, who's a great literature prof. He said this. He said, Esalen believes that the great epics, that is, the great literature, create a desire to defend one's way of life. And so he wondered out loud in one of his writings, for what will you die? For what will you stand as a witness? Staking all you have and are, even your sacred honor, as the signers of the Declaration of Independence did, in what was no rhetorical flourish. This is an important statement, just as Ronald Reagan said. Freedom is the very essence of our nation. We never give up the fight for freedom, a fight which, though it may never end, is the most ennobling known to man. So our focus is always on the holiday, setting it apart.
That's in depth. So Memorial Day. Tell me about the history of Memorial Day for those who don't understand what it is and why we celebrate it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me tie this, the emphasis on Memorial Day, that last Monday in May we celebrate every single year. Let's tie this back into the book of Proverbs, because I think this is a huge thing. As you well suggest, how in the world do you tie Proverbs to Memorial Day? Well, let me read some statements from Proverbs 28 and 29. These are Proverbs chapters 28 and 29. So here's one, Proverbs 28:5. Evil men do not understand justice. They don't understand justice. Verse 12, when the righteous triumph, there's glory, but when the wicked rise, people hide themselves. Verse 28 in that same chapter, when the wicked rise, people hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. Over to chapter 29 and verse 2, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. Verse 4, by justice a king brings up the land, but he who extracts gifts tears it down. Verse 7, a righteous man knows the rights of the poor. And verse 10, bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless and seek the life of the upright. So here we go. We need to talk about justice and righteousness again. We've talked about these words intermittently in this program. And I want to make sure that what we talk about, first of all, is what we're not saying. America is a nation founded on law. That's a very important idea. That is, these things come from outside of us. Now look, America, the good, the bad, and the ugly, we all know what it is. We all know some of the history that makes this a difficult place. However, we need to remember and understand and be positive about America. Without a strong military protecting us, imagine what our lives would be like. There'd be no standard. There'd be no justice. We complain about injustice without celebrating justice. So we talk about the bad stuff without the good stuff. So, should we care for injustice? Well, of course. That's not what I'm saying. We continue to malign institutions such as the police, the military, and the court system, however. And the problem with that is, do we acknowledge these systems are broken? Sure, absolutely. What isn't broken? But think about this. Imagine women in Saudi Arabia, what they would give for an American court system. Imagine human slaves in Yemen, what they would give for our police to protect them. Imagine what the Karen tribe in Myanmar wouldn't give to have the U.S. Marine Corps standing between them and a government who wants them dead. Is America a perfect place? What place is? But I bet no American, no matter her political persuasion, would want to live in a country that does not have the justice and the freedom our country has.
Okay. Says it all. We have to stand for something and we'll fall for anything.
That's right.
And so Proverbs and how it relates to Memorial Day in America
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So those verses that we just read, all of those verses about righteousness and justice, those are the keys to understanding why we celebrate this holy day, a day set apart. So let's move to this very important concept of the importance of government and military from a Christian point of view. I have a good friend. His name is Don DeCostin. In fact, he's Major General Don DeCostin, and he is over all of the chaplains in the United States Air Force. And his job is actually to oversee what they do and who they are and what they say. Now, Dondi was one of the guys in my PhD cohort, and every time we got together, we talked about military history, and he appreciated the fact that we were emphasizing the things that were important in America. Well, last year, Dondi gave the opening invocation to the USO Gala. That's the United States organization, and they honor those who serve. And I want you to listen to the last minute of his prayer that he gave. This is the invocation at the USO in 2015.
And finally, Father, we ask you to bless the studs in harm's way tonight, who are suited up and ready to suck it up for as long as it takes to get the bad guys to wise up. Help us do our part to speak up on their behalf until it's our turn to show up. keep us riled up. Don't let us ease up, back up, soften up, mess up, get fed up, or give up. We know that one day the prophet Isaiah's words will call us to listen up. Then we'll wake up to beat our swords into plowshares and not have to train for war anymore. About that day, we have only one thing left to say, Lord, giddy up. We're ready for this conflict thing to wrap up anytime you are. Until then, we join the USO in its mission to lift up the spirits of our nation's heroes until you decide our time's up. Now that it's time for me to shut up, I'll just say, amen.
Amen.
Now, I don't know about y'all, but if that doesn't make you want to stand up and salute, I don't know what will. Dondi is one of these great guys who is really soft-spoken, but when it comes to the military, he is all in. U.S. Major General, USAF, Dondi Costin. We're grateful for his service and all of those who serve. Grateful again for our military. Military, by the way, is never denounced in Scripture. Actually, Dondi's reference to Isaiah assumes that we will need weapons and combat until he comes back again. All of this, of course, is dedicated and predicated on the idea that we are inherently corrupt people and desperately need government. I know we cry and complain about government. We'll say, oh, the government this and the government that. But hey, man, it was an institution dedicated by God in Genesis chapter 9. Very important. The chief job of the government and administration is to protect its people, to keep us safe and free. And I, along with HB, are glad to live here, man.
I don't even know where else to go. So.
That's right.
So we're going to take a short break, and we are awaiting Mr. John Rickert. And speaking of representing our country well, he will be in at the top of the hour, and we will be right back on Warp and Woof Radio. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You're listening to the Warp and Woof Radio show. Just want to give a big shout out to Mother Eckel out in Denver, Colorado.
There you go,
and, Mom. Always just happy that she's listening and tuning in to this great show. We've been talking about Memorial Day in America. As you know, on the show each and every week, we relate our topics based on the book of Proverbs and basically the rules to live by. Mark, why should Christians care about Memorial Day?
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a huge issue for me. I really think, if I could just start it out this way, that I need to go back to repeat a couple things I said in the first segment. First of all, holiday is a very important word instead of using the word vacation. Holiday meaning to set something apart. So we're setting this day apart to remember those who have died to give us freedom. This is huge for us. Something else we need to remember from the first segment is what we read from Proverbs chapters 28 and 29 about justice and about when righteous men are in charge or when those who are bloodthirsty who are in charge. There are some major differences between the two. So let me give you some basic ideals from my cultural reading this week. Every week I'm creating all kinds of cultural connections for my students and capturing some of these things for our broadcast. So here are a few. One of the people that folks might need to know about is a guy by the name of Victor Davis Hanson. Victor Davis Hanson. He's a classicist, which means that he knows stuff like Latin and Greek. And he's one of the most brilliant thinkers that I've ever read. He has his own piece, his own podcast, his own blog. I definitely think everybody should be reading Victor Davis Hanson. He's great on history. He's great on some of the issues that we're facing right now. I hold him and Robert P. George as two of America's shining intellectual lights. Robert P. George is Princeton professor of law. Then I'd like to mention Peggy Noonan. Her columns run every week in the Wall Street Journal, every Friday. She has tremendous and incisive insights. She's right there in D.C. She's writing about the things that are happening, about the folks that it's happening to, and always, always, always caring about the folks like us in the flyover states. Peggy's always talking about us and the need for understanding why these days are important and why government and why America is important. Let me give you some other ideas here. You know, normally when I write, I connect to places like WAPO, which is Washington Post, the New York Times, National Public Radio. I even quote from Salon and Slate. Now, most of those places, I don't necessarily agree with their perspectives, but I'm always looking at the other side to see what folks are actually saying. I'd like to give you some other perspectives to consider, some other magazines and other websites to think about. I'd like to suggest places like the Weekly Standard. Every week and every day, actually, they come out with new stuff that connects Americans to America and why it's an important place to live, the Weekly Standard. National Review is another great magazine, another great place to go to find a different point of view than you're going to see in the mainstream media. A couple of Catholic points of view here to mention. Touchstone Magazine and First Things Magazine. I highly recommend either one of those, Touchstone or First Things. Washington Times is a good alternative to the Washington Post. The Witherstone Institute and the John Jay Institute are a couple of institutes that actually are developing the next leaders of America, the next foundational leaders, and they are doing some really great work in places like Washington, D.C. There's just a few ideas for us in this piece.
Now, you know that we have a lot of different events, parades, all the, really honoring our servicemen and women.
Yep.
Tell me about some of the stories and events that about Memorial Day that captured your attention.
Absolutely. So I was addressing a high school audience on vocation. That means what it means to be a student, your calling as a student. And I used the military as the basis for my introductory remarks. And I said things like this: some folks are born to fight. They love the adrenaline rush of combat. And what they do allows us to go to school without worrying that we will have to dodge AK-47 rifle fire or rocket-propelled grenades. And you know what happened? I was totally surprised by this. I was surprised by what happened next. Spontaneous applause. Students were clapping out of gratitude for the freedom that the soldiers who had given their lives for them to keep them free. These 400 students in central Indiana have seen family and friends go off to war. I don't know if you've seen some of the pieces that have come out about the Marine sergeant that keeps his salute for 3 hours in Washington, D.C. This thing is just amazing. He's done it for the last number of years. Just Google him or YouTube him, the Marine Sergeant keeping a salute for 3 hours. It's an amazing piece. You'll see bikers stop and giving him water and help and so on. It's a wonderful thing. Watch YouTube tributes to fallen soldiers. People line highways for miles to honor the fallen as they are laid to rest. This is an amazing event, and you better bring some Kleenex when you're watching stuff like that, I got to tell you. And then there are the bikers. I got to love these guys, man. They dress in their leather and all that kind of stuff and drive their Harleys, but they are doing some really great work. Since 1988, they have done something called Rolling Thunder, where thousands, tens of thousands of bikers are rolling through Washington, D.C., not only to remember those who have gone missing in wars, but those who have died for our freedom, and just the fact that this is America, and we can be free, and we should celebrate these holidays and support these kinds of causes. This is what I'm talking about today, and my mom even mentioned this to me in a text just a moment ago. I'm on my soapbox, man. Look it out.
I've never seen you this fired up. I'm a little bit afraid. And this last question is kind of like me, because you just mentioned that some people were born to fight.
Yep.
I'm a lover.
Yep.
I'm not a fighter.
That's right.
So, I thank God for the Marines and policemen and people like that, because I could not imagine every day waking up and going out knowing that, hey, to be the predator
That's right.
is my job, the defender is my job. So what would you say to those who are pacifists and they just want to live in peace?
Sure, absolutely. And by the way, I would say that I'm right there with you, HB. I'm one of those guys who is a lover, not a fighter, and my mom's going to chuckle at that one too. But I'm going to say this: peace does not come out of thin air. Peace does not come out of thin air. Pacifists, by the way, whom I love and respect for their position. I have a number of friends who are pacifists, but I would say to them that pacifists would be called slaves in a dictatorial country. Let me give you some examples of this. If you remember The Dark Knight, you remember the Batman and the Joker, all this good stuff. Well, the Joker had this view of life that was well summarized by Bruce Wayne's faithful servant Alfred. And this is what Alfred said about the Joker. Some men aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And there it is. That's what we're up against in this world. When I think about being a pacifist, I think about people that need to keep pacifism possible. So that means keeping the peace. You remember back in 2004, there was a horrendous tsunami that hit Indonesia. About 10,000 people died in this thing. It was awful, abysmal. Guess who the first ones were to come up to help the Muslim population in Indonesia? It wasn't Saudi Arabia. It wasn't Yemen. The first to give aid was the United States Navy. You know what's really interesting to me is that when a battleship sits offshore, the bad guys think twice about what they're about to do. We're going to have a guy on here, USMC John Rickert, here in our second hour. And I want to just mention one of the great captions that the USMC uses. They say, a Marine can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Nobody wants war, nobody wants to die, but shed blood makes us free. Those who disparage our founding fathers do not think about what they gave up to give us this country. A good number who signed the Declaration lost everything. Some died, and each one gave up their privileged position to stand against tyranny.
I guess, are you willing to fight for the peace is the question of the day?
There you go. There you go.
And if you're a pacifist, kind of, I don't know, I'm borderline.
Yeah.
Now, I will kick some jazz. So we're going to go to that right now. And you're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Group side. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Group site, Warp and Woof. And man, you just have to imagine what's going on. I have this music thing, and I don't know. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we are talking about Memorial Day in America on the Warp and Woof show today, and our off-air, man, it is worth the fight.
It is.
It is worth the fight.
It is that.
So why do you care so deeply, Mark? What made you do this show today, and about the U.S. military?
Sure, absolutely. So I got to tell you about my dad. My dad was not a very good father. Certainly not a good husband at all. But my dad fought in Korea as a Marine. I learned the Marine Corps hymn when I was 4 years old. I could still sing it today, the Marine Corps hymn.
Let's go.
Yeah. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. 4 years old. There you go, man. 4 years old. I was singing that stuff. So when I think about my country, I think about respect, I think about honor, I think about gratitude. There was a man by the name of Czesław Miłosz who literally lived through the Polish occupation, the Nazi occupation of Poland, I should say, in World War II. He won the 1980 Nobel laureate for poetry. And this is what he said during his acceptance speech of the Nobel Prize. He said, "Those living owe a debt to those who have died. Those living owe a debt to those who have died." So it's my responsibility now to be thankful, to give honor and respect to those who have served. There was a time some years back when I was taking my family every summer to Washington, D.C. And I remember taking my son Tyler there. And I remember going to the Honor of the Fallen at the national memorials there. And I remember going to the changing of the guard with him. And I'll never forget, everybody was stone silent. And he held my hand through the whole thing, and then we talked about it on the way home, on the way back to the hotel. The changing of the guard will change people if they go and watch this thing in Washington, D.C. My little girl and I, same thing, different trip. I took her to Washington, D.C., and we went to Lincoln's Memorial. Well, if you go up the steps of Lincoln Memorial, and there are two porticos, one to the left, one to the right. The one on the right actually has the second inaugural address etched in stone in the second inaugural addresses there in Lincoln's Memorial. So I take Chelsea in, and here's this little girl. She's 12 years old at the time, and she begins to read out loud the second inaugural address of Lincoln. Now, there were probably 40, 50 people in that portico that day, and they all became stone quiet as this little girl recited Lincoln's famous lines in the second inaugural about justice and about the inhumanity of slavery and on and on. I could tell you lots more stories about this. Here's another one. I teach all over the place, and one of the places I teach is actually in Washington, D.C. I had a group of students there a couple of years ago, 17 actually in that particular class, one of whom was one of the horse soldiers in Afghanistan. Now let me explain what a horse soldier is. Actually, if you want to go and check out the book, Doug Stanton wrote a book called Horse Soldiers. Well, one of these guys, there were 250 of these guys who went into Afghanistan on the backs of horses. These were the first guys into the fight in 2001, right after 9/11. They were going in to do background cultural research, get the topography of the land, those kinds of things. One of those guys was sitting in my classroom, and I spent an hour and a half during lunch one day just peppering him with questions about what that meant and why this thing is so important to us. Here's one more story. The NFL. If I love the military, I also love the NFL. I get the NFL ticket, man. If you want to come over and spend a Sunday with me in the fall, it's all about that. So these guys, every fall, in October, they dress in camo. All the camo stuff comes out, and the NFL does this to celebrate and appreciate all of the soldiers who serve. Great football players like Jared Allen or Terrell Davis, or Ron Rivera, coach of the Carolina Panthers, A.J. Green, the Cincinnati Bengals. We have Thomas's troops, military families that are celebrated by Joe Thomas, the Cleveland Browns. I could go on and on and on. One of the wonderful things that the NFL does for the military. I could tell you, I could spend the rest of our time today talking about this, HB, but I got to shut up because we got more questions.
And so, what are some of the books and movies that people can read if they're really, really wanting to find out more about Memorial Day?
Sure.
and discover some things that they don't know?
Maybe that they don't know.
We've been talking off air about some things I just did not know.
Yeah. Well, one of them I want to bring forward right away is a movie called Act of Valor. Act of Valor. It was done in, I think it was 2012. Real Navy SEALs are in this movie. There are no Hollywood actors. Actually, the directors were both guys who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. You want to talk about heroism, family, and America? That is a movie you want to see, Act of Valor. Then I've got sitting in front of me, I just had HB lift this thing up. He said...
about 80 pounds.
Yeah, it's about 80 pounds. You can lift weights with this thing. It's called the USMC, A Complete History of the United States Marine Corps. One of my friends who has been my student, continues obviously to be my friend, J.R. I want to give a shout out to J.R. He gave me this book for my birthday a couple weeks ago because he knows how much I love the Marine Corps. J.R. would sit in the very front row of my classes, and he would sit there in the front, and I would always say to him the same thing, that he was taking the point in our education. If you know something about the military, you know that taking point means that you're the lead person on that platoon, and that you're going to take the first fire, and that's what he always was. A great book if you want to pick it up and do some weightlifting with it, but also learn some history. It's great stuff. Sebastian Junger, that's spelled Junger, has written a couple of books that are really important called War and Tribe, that deal with the issues of war being embedded with troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. And here are some movies. I'll just list them off because they're really important to me. Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, Lone Survivor with Mark Wahlberg, The Hurt Locker with Jeremy Renner and Catherine Bigelow. Catherine actually won the Academy Award that year for Best Picture. Black Hawk Down, man, if you've not seen Black Hawk Down from the 1990s, the travesty that happened to our troops there, this is such a powerful movie, and talk about guys that are a cohesive unit they were. And then I want to give a special shout out to David Ayers. He's done two very important movies. David served not only in Afghanistan and Iraq, but he's also served as a police officer. He's done two fantastic films called End of Watch and Fury. Fury, I'll mention, starring Brad Pitt. It's a tank movie, end of World War II. But Ayers said in an interview that he did both of these movies as a homage, that is, a thankfulness, a gratitude to police officers and military who have served.
Well, speaking of thankful, man, the man walked in,
yes,
Mr. Military himself, John Rickert. I'm telling you, man, I got chills when he walked in the room because this is about thanking the great work and the protection of our country that they've been giving us for years. And we're going to talk to him at the top of the hour. You know, it's sad that people will prey on somebody like the military,
Absolutely.
and people like the military. What types of organizations should we support around this holiday? Because there are a lot of scams going on.
Absolutely.
So who and what should we support?
I got to tell you, first thing that comes to my mind is if you know somebody personally that has served and is having trouble, let's say, paying for their house payments or having trouble feeding their kids, all of this support really needs to be local, and the local needs to be next-door neighbors. If you've got next-door neighbors who have served, make sure to go knock on their door and check them out and make sure that they're doing okay, and thank them again for their service. If there's nothing else that we can do on this Memorial Day, I want to make sure, tie this back to the movie thing, man, you got to watch the first 5 minutes of Top Gun. You remember that old movie, Top Gun, from the 1980s? Man, that first 5 minutes, that rock music will move you down the road. I'll tell you, that's really good stuff. Here are some organizations and some folks who are doing some really good work. George W. Bush, the President of the United States for two terms, does a great thing with wounded veterans. Some of these guys have lost their legs in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and he actually does a bike-a-thon with them down in Texas, takes care of these guys so well. Wonderful group of men, and shout out to George W. for his work there. Wounded Warriors, love Wounded Warriors. I've supported them for years. Great organization. You see them on commercials all over the place. A number of Hollywood stars that support our veterans and those who have served. Guys like Gary Sinise, Robert Patrick, and Matthew McConaughey. These are the guys who stand up and say, you know what, we need to support those guys who have served. We need to take care of them now that they're back. We need to make sure that we show up at places like the USO. So parades, picnics, and fireworks. We're going to celebrate all those things and have a good time this next weekend, but I want to shout out a special note to these folks, the folks I'm about to mention right now. I want to talk specifically to all the history teachers in high school. And I got to say this to all the history teachers. If a nation does not teach its own history, it will soon be history. I'll be blunt. America is one of the few nations in human history that's literally built on ideas. Ideas, you can't hold them in your hand. If we cease to teach these ideas to our children and to school children, the ideas will be trampled by a future dictator under his hobnailed boot. You know, before we had different ties with Cuba, I would always say the same thing. Do you ever see people in Miami getting in rickety boats seeking freedom in Havana? Absolutely not. Do you see people in Cuba getting in rickety boats seeking freedom in Miami? Absolutely yes. Why is that? Because for years, people groups have come to be part of the American idea. But American ideas depend on telling the American story. So if a nation doesn't teach its own history, it will soon be history. But a nation which teaches its own history, it will have a future. So my shout out today, especially to all of the high school teachers, and I'll add college instructors as well. If we are not teaching the history of the United States of America, we are going to be in some real hurt in generations to come, and that's why this fires me up, man, these kinds of things.
Yeah. And before we go on break, to all the listeners out there, I think it's a crying shame when our veterans who have gone over to protect our country have to come home and they don't have places to live and don't have resources to live a normal life. So we have to fight hard. And there are a lot of grassroots organizations that I've been working with, seeing to the fact that the disabled veterans around here are going to be clothed, fed, housed, opportunities to get different occupations. Because if you go spend 8 years of your life in today's world and come back home, the job market is entirely different than it was when you left. So training programs, everything. We have to be just adamant about making sure.
And here's, just to follow up on your good ideas here, HB, this is a huge concept for us and one that we talk about every single week. Do good, do good, do good. Find people that need us. Find folks who are suffering. Focus on others. That's the Christian emphasis in Scripture and should certainly be lived out in our lives. And the focal point always for us is going to be looking for ways that we can do good to others, including those who have served, man.
You already know it. When we come back, we're going to talk to a young man in the house who has served, and we're going to find out more from Mr. John Rickert. And we'll be right back. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site, and we are back. Dr. Mark Eckel and the man, guest of honor today, John Rickert, is in the house. Mark, I'm going to just let you take it away, and I want to sit back and listen.
Oh, that's good, man. Thanks, HB. I always appreciate your launching us here in the second hour. Just to reiterate, here in the second hour, we're remembering history and honoring those who serve in the military, keeping faith with the Memorial Day in the United States of America. And John Rickert is our guest here in the second hour. And we want to welcome you to the show, John, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your work for the Marine Corps, and how your Christian beliefs connect with the military.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me here. Glad to really be here. My background is I was raised in a Lutheran home, split family. Dad was Lutheran, Mom was Catholic, so they didn't go to church, but they made all 6 of us kids go. And today, 5 of the 6 of us are born-again Christians.
Wow.
So something rubbed off on us back then.
There you go.
That, train a child in the way you should go. And I met my wife. I wasn't actually a saved Christian at the time. I met my wife in a bar. She was a waitress, and I hung out there a lot. And we had kind of a rocky relationship. And I was 26 years old when I enlisted in the Marine Corps because I couldn't find a job and didn't have any education. So I went in the Marine Corps as a private, of course. And my first tour of duty, my duty station was Okinawa, Japan. And although I wasn't a Christian, even still on Sundays, I felt a calling to I needed to be in church. I needed to go, and I didn't fully grasp it. My heart really wasn't there, but I knew something was pulling inside of me. Came home, got married, moved to Kansas City, and had a rocky relationship with the wife, and she left me and had to move out of base housing. And a dear friend of mine, who actually at the time he was kind of more of an acquaintance, he stopped by as I was cleaning the house up, getting ready to turn it back into the government, and said, he said, what's going on? And I explained to him. He goes, I got to run some errands. I'll be back to help you out. Well, as we were washing windows or doing whatever, he suddenly looks at me and he goes, do you know Jesus? I said, I know Jesus. I was raised in a Lutheran church. He says, no, do you know Jesus? I said, yeah, I told you, I know Jesus. And he asked me a third time. And I still get choked up today thinking about it. I said, no, actually, I don't. And it was him walking out of that leap and just keep asking me the question, because I think he knew. I think the Holy Spirit was already talking to him. But I went and lived in his basement for about a month. My wife and I got back. I got saved. Went to church that Sunday. We got saved. My wife and I got back together about a couple weeks later. It's been a great ride since then. But it's also been a great ride within being able to be a Marine in comparing a lot of serving as a Marine, because it's called service members, and serving as a Christian, because we're called to be servants. I try to walk that dual path of always thinking of myself as a servant. I'm trying to help. How can I help others? Whether it's I spent 6 years on active duty. Again, I was 17 years as a reservist. But how do I work at Edison as a civilian? Because I work for the Marine Corps as a civilian employee too. So I don't know that. My wife always tells me I need to go find a job somewhere else. I don't want to go anywhere else. I love being around the Marine Corps. But it's always that same attitude. The idea of for my employees that worked for me, how do I help them become successful? That's my job to do, and I relate that into the servant of being a Christian. How am I supposed to help others and help them become successful?
Boy, those are great words. When I think about somebody like yourself who has served in the Corps, somebody who has given so much of their life to service for our country, I'm always mindful of the fact that there are an awful lot of folks out there that have done this. Think with me just for a moment as we think about this first segment about what you would say, or how do you respond to folks who are presently serving, who have served? What's your kind of camaraderie with them? Tell us a little bit about that background.
Well, it's interesting because no matter where we are, and an example I'll give you, last week I had a new heating and air conditioning system put into my house. And one of the trucks that pulled in, the front license plate on his truck was an Air Force emblem. So, of course, I immediately start bragging on him about being in the Air Force. It's just what we do. I mean, we're Marines. And then he looks over at his buddy and he goes, yeah, he was in the Army. So but it didn't matter. We all served together. We all had jobs to do. Another great example of that is I was at LA Fitness one day. And I usually wear a Marine Corps T-shirt. I just wear whatever I happen to put on. And there's a guy in there. He's all tatted up and he's all muscular and stuff. And I could see some Marine Corps. He's got the Eagle Globe and Anchor, and he's got his unit logo tattooed. Yep. And he's like, "Hey, brother, how you doing?" And I was like, "I was doing great." He goes, "What'd you do in the Corps?" And I told him, I said, "Well, I was a computer guy and an administrator." He's like, "Really?" He's you're the only guy I've ever met. Everybody else tells me that they're special operations. I was like, "No, I was proud of what I did. I made sure you got paid." So I said my job was critical. Yeah. And I realized that every single component of the military, because I think the ratio is like 10 to 1. There are about 10 people supporting the ground fighters. So, from logistics to motor T to, supply to administration to pay to accounting, all those other things have to happen or the military doesn't function.
It strikes me as you talk about the Army and the Air Force that, there's that kind of jagged humor from time to time, but at the same time you have a great esprit de corps. There's a spirit that you've borne together, whether you actually saw combat or not, but you've served together. That's really huge and helpful. Think about this for our listeners. Then, how do those of us who haven't served, those who have served, how do we think about these kinds of things from a Christian point of view as we think about the military and Memorial Day?
From a Christian perspective, a lot of the people who are out there serving, they're going through the same struggles, and sometimes they're even a little bit magnified, obviously, because of the service time. We don't work normal hours. We don't normally have an 8 to 5 job or a 9 to 5 job. I mean, oftentimes it's day on, stay on until something happens, or you're out on deployments or exercises. And it's not just the service member; it's their families who are also dealing with all those issues, because a lot of times the spouse who's left behind, now suddenly they're the dual parent, and they've got to do all of that extra work. So through our church, we've actually formed a military ministry, and one of the things we have is the third Thursday of every month is a family support meeting for military members, and we've also went to including first responders, because the same issues that we see affecting service members also affect a lot of policemen, firemen, EMTs, things like that. So it's like, well, just why aren't we helping everybody who's in? We all have similar stories. So that's where we look at the idea. And with Memorial Day, it's the idea of, for me, it's the memory of anybody who has been in any kind of a service type field, like the first responders or in the military, who's lost their life. I mean, we've lost a lot of police officers here in Indiana lately.
Yes.
And that's just not a good thing.
No.
You know? So how do we help those families? How do we remember those? How do we pay them respect and honor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is huge. I'm always mindful of this specifically because at Memorial Day we tend to focus our attention on this, and we want to make sure that we have a show that honors everybody that's served in one way or another. That's really a powerful and important tool that we can use. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers, Mel Gibson. The Vietnam War picture. Yeah, excellent film. And you saw in that particular movie, at the end of the movie, you see the Mel Gibson character actually sending a journal back to a Vietnamese war-widowed wife. Here's this woman receiving this journal from a man who fought and literally killed her husband. What do you tell us about how do we respond to others who have maybe even fought against the United States now? How do we respond to those folks in our thinking about these things on a Memorial Day?
Similarly to what happened, and I'll go back to saying like in World War II or even in Vietnam, typically wars are not started by service people.
Yeah, that's
the wars are started by politicians. I mean, that's usually where. So when you're looking at a people group, whether it's the Vietnamese, the Koreans, the Russians, the Chinese, they're not really different from us for the most part. So the fact that they were served in the military, they were trying to serve honorably. They were trying to do the right thing, just like we were.
Right.
It's the exact same thing. So their families are just as important as our families. So to be able to memorialize any service member from anywhere in the world is a great thing.
Yeah. This is a huge concern for us. That one of the things we talk about on this show all the time is do good, do good, do good. Obviously, if you're going to be reaching out to first responders and families like that, this is a huge issue for us. But also from a Christian point of view, our responsibility is to love people no matter who they are. Now, there are going to be some things we're going to talk about in this second segment where we talk about some of the difficulties of conflict and those kinds of things. But nonetheless, our responsibility, first and foremost as Christians, is to love.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that is the two great commandments, you know, love your God and love your neighbor.
There you go.
That boils it all down. I mean, Jesus boiled down the entire law in 2 sentences.
There you go.
But the idea of is that part of it is always remembering, and I tell people, I walk my dogs early in the morning, and God has a great way of taking me to the woodshed when I'm walking my dogs and I'm by myself, 4 o'clock in the morning. But he reminds me all the time that I am no better and I am no different than everybody and anybody else out there. My struggles may be a little bit different. My background is different because it's unique to me. But the fact is that we all have those kinds of challenges and issues, and we all need to be mindful of that. and be respectful.
Right.
So think of the idea of when the guy's tailgating you, trying to hurry up to get somewhere. Well, maybe he really does have a hurry up appointment that he's got to get to, and he's running late, or he just found out that his kid's in the hospital and he's trying to get there. So it's trying to think and put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, okay, well, how would I want somebody to treat me? The golden rule.
There you go.
Do unto others as I would have them do unto me.
That's great. Well, HB, we talked about this off air, actually, the issue of accepting people for who they are, what they are, not caring about those kinds of things. And actually, the great commandment, HB, isn't that important here?
Exactly. Love thy neighbor as you love yourself. I don't know what's so hard about it. I mean, we make, and you're right, it's been put into about 2 sentences on what you need to do, and we make it so difficult. We're going to come right back. John Rickert in studio today. Mark Eckel. Yeah. I'm loving it. I'm sitting back like just one of those listeners out in the cyber world right now. We'll be right back to the Cool Group site. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Group site, Warp and Woof Radio, Comenius Institute, Dr. Mark Eckel, our special guest in studio, USMC. John Rickert is in the house, and I've told you, I went back to my office and started listening like I was at work.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
But continue on. Sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about your salvation experience and specifically family and the Corps and so on. But I want to move on to that next question. Why is the military important to you specifically? And then why should it be important to all Americans?
Part of the reason it's important to me is the idea of belonging. We talked earlier about that camaraderie, and I do have that camaraderie with friends that I've had for almost 30 years now that I would have never met otherwise. People from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, but also the idea of serving. A lot of people come up to me and they say, thank you for your service, and I says, well, one of the reasons I serve is because I know so many others who can't. Like I said, I told you my dad, he was 4F in World War II. There are many people who are like that would love to be able to do it, that just can't do it. Well, I'm physically capable of doing it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to be in there doing it. But also the idea of protecting our freedom. I mean, this is, I think you mentioned it earlier in your program, the idea that this is not this is a way of life, the American experience.
Yep.
People don't come here just because we are kind of cool. They come here because we have something nobody else in the world has.
Yeah.
And protecting that kind of freedom, even though I love the Constitution. I don't like what people say a lot, but you know what? They've got the freedom to say it.
Absolutely.
And I'm willing to put a uniform on to protect them, to make sure that they keep that right to say.
That's right. That's right. We're grateful for that, because the freedom issue is what's really huge to us. When I think about the ideas issue, this always reminds me of when we went into Iraq in 2003, and what we saw on every single building and any picture that came out of Baghdad or any place else in Iraq was the picture of the dictator. And what's important to understand about dictatorial regimes is that they always have that big brother watching them, and it's such a pictorial culture and society, but we live based on ideas and words.
Yes.
I mean, how cool is that?
And to think about the knowledge of the people who originally wrote, those guys who originally wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Yeah. How smart that those guys were to have been that learned and that studied, and to have seen the broad picture of the history of man.
Yes.
And where they saw the right things to put in place. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant.
This always reminds me of how important it is to study history again. Before we even come to the American Revolution in the 1770s, we've got to go back 200 years to the Swiss Reformational documents, actually the Swiss Constitution, that actually had Christian ideals embedded in it, and where we actually get our 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, come out of that. It's fascinating.
Yes, and to be able to understand that history, and I as a teenager, I hated history. I thought it was boring. Of course, part of that was probably my ADD, but I didn't understand it. I was like, what does this old stuff have to do? And now I look back at it and I'm going, I want to learn more about it. I want to understand better. Why did we have these things? Where did that idea come from? Where did Thomas Jefferson get his thoughts at? He studied all of these other civilizations. He studied all these other governments. I said, that made sense why he created it the way he created it.
That's right. Yeah, it's huge. Well, we could go on and on about all of these questions all day long, I suspect, between the two of us. Let me get on to the next question. Tell us about your work and specifically your witness when you were deployed to Afghanistan in 2008.
That was interesting. I was 47 years old, and I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. Actually, I just volunteered to deploy. I looked at multiple places, but and my wife and I talked about it. We prayed a lot about it, and she said she felt that the God was calling me to go to serve somewhere else. That there was something for me to be doing. So God lined up all these things to fall into place to where I ended up being in Afghanistan. And as I got there, I was originally supposed to be stationed in Bagram, Afghanistan, up in the northern part of the country. But as it happened, God opened up a billet for me to go down to southern Afghanistan into Kandahar, and there I was attached to the 182nd CSSB, an Army brigade. I was the sole Marine attached to the Army, and it was different seeing how they operated some things. But again, it's very similar because it's American military. But I got the chance to work with 4 or 5 female soldiers who were probably in their early to mid-20s, and none of them had great father relationships. Well, being a 47-year-old, at the time I was already a grandfather, so I became their surrogate dad. So I talked to them a lot about a lot of different things, about their relationships, about their husbands or boyfriends or whatever, and it was really cool to be able to do that and to witness to them. And one of the things that helped me to do was that one of these young ladies, we were walking back from the little exchange that we had on base, and I only saw this one time, not saying how many times it may have happened or whatever, but I only saw it once, that there was a man, he was in a parking lot, and he was pulling out his prayer rug, and he was laying it out, and he was pointing it toward Mecca, and she looked at him, and she says, "What is that guy doing?" I said, "Well, he's trying to be a good Muslim. He's called to pray 5 times a day." I said, "That's part of his faith." She's like, "Really?" She goes, and it was just weird because it was a dirt parking lot. It was nothing there or whatever. And I says, "Yeah." I says, "Well," and I got to explain to her and tell her, I says, "Well, that's one of the differences between Christianity and all other religions is that ours, first off, is a relationship, but it's also the fact that God has given us this gift. I don't have to do anything to do it. Every other religion has to do something to earn that favor with their God." So that was a great thing to be able to talk to her about that. But there was a lot of great Christians I met there. We had Bible studies every Saturday night with the Army chaplain and a bunch of great folks who were awesome Christians that I met there. And it was multi-service. We had I had a Canadian major that I had met that she came and attended our Bible studies on a regular basis, and so it was really cool. But when the Marines came in there, they did end up coming back in, and I was responsible for doing these briefings in the mornings. We call them a day 2 brief, where I give them the cultural background. They got a whole lot of different classes on hygiene and don't pet the dogs because they don't have a rabies program and all that. And one of the times I was giving one of these classes, it was on a Sunday morning, and the Navy chaplain asked me, he said, "Can we borrow your equipment so that we can do our services?" I said, "Well, I can't leave it here." I said, "But I'll be happy to attend if you don't mind." And he was like, "Sure, And so I attended the service, and it was an awesome church service. And one of the people I met there was this first sergeant, and rock solid Christian guy, super Marine. I mean, just a really awesome person. Just one of the people you just love to meet and be around. The following week, the Marines started rolling out to their different bases where they were going to be going. And it was on a Friday morning, and literally he had not been away from the base more than an hour, and his Humvee ended up getting blown up by an IED. And we had a ramp ceremony for him, and the ramp ceremony is people of the whole base, literally anybody who's got the free time, which even if you had to leave work for a little bit, you went out to the flight line and you stood there as they brought the caskets onto and loaded them onto the plane, whatever branch of service it was, whatever country the military was. Because Canadians, Kiwis, Australians, English, American, we didn't care. We all turned out. But it got me a chance to witness to some of the Marines that knew this first sergeant, and I was able to talk to him, and I said, "Do you know why he wasn't worried about rolling out and dying? Because he knew where he was going to go. He knew who his Savior was. He knew God had already paid the price to get him to heaven, and he accepted that fully." I said, "You need to understand that same thing. You need to have that same kind of faith that will allow you to go out and fearlessly do your job without worrying about the so-called consequences." I don't look at it as a consequence.
Yeah.
I look forward to the day when it's going to happen to me.
Sure, absolutely. Just for the sake of clarity, tell people what the ramp ceremony means.
Yeah, the ramp ceremony is it is where the caskets of whatever service member is basically it's a long, several thousand people will be lining this parade route basically, and they are brought out with a very slow procession. And I get choked up even still talking about it because I attended so many of these. And typically, for any of the Allied forces, typically what was always playing in the background was they were playing Amazing Grace on bagpipes. And they actually had a bagpiper there that was playing it. And it just, I can't hear it today without just coming apart. It just, yep. But so the idea is that it's all, and it's not just the military personnel, it turns out, because we had like 50 different countries represented with contractors and other people. So a lot of the contractors would also turn out to pay respects and honor our dead. And again, it didn't matter the branch of service, the country. Nobody cared. You know, it wasn't like, oh well, that's just the Australians. We're not going to. No, you all turned out, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever time, it didn't matter. You got out there and you went out there and paid respects. And it was the most amazing sight to see.
Whenever I think about Amazing Grace and bagpipes, the tears start welling up in my eyes just thinking about that song being played in that way. Your camaraderie with people from different services is wonderful, but then to see that you've also had that same kind of connection with people from other countries, I mean, that's pretty impressive, to be honest with you, when you stop to think about how we have a tendency to focus on the negative in our culture, in the media. You know, this group is bad, or that kind of people group is bad. That just seems to strike me as wrong. And you bring in a whole different perspective here today about that. Yeah,
and it was interesting because it was kind of funny actually. We actually invited the Brits to our 4th of July celebration. So it was kind of, and they welcomed it. They were, but we also had for the Canadians, we also had a concrete hockey rink. So
that's great.
And again, it was just a great time. I mean, it was just we're all serving together, and it was an awesome experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'd love to go back again if I could.
Nice, yeah. Well, this certainly leads to the next question, which is, why is it so important to understand anybody's cultural background? I mean, here you were in Afghanistan. Talk to us about the importance of culture.
Well, that goes to really one of the guys that I met there. He was an Afghani. We had a bazaar, a shopping thing where all these different Afghanis brought in all these wares, and it was the black market DVDs and the fake rifles, but they also brought in some really cool things. They brought in rubies are native to Afghanistan, so they had a lot of ruby dealers who would sell you these rubies, and they were incredibly cheap. My wife got a very nice gift from them. But there was a rug dealer that I met there, and he went by the name of Diamond, and I became very friendly with him and his father. And his father was funny because I could tell he had been around the U.S. military a lot because he swore a lot. So it's like, yeah, you were around a lot of military. That's where you learned English. But Diamond, I mean, I would sit there and I'd have tea with him, and I'd just sit there and converse with him and just talk, and he would explain to me about how they make the different rugs and things. And one of the stories that really struck me about him was he said that he didn't get much sleep the night before because he had to go pick his wife up from a wedding. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. Why wouldn't you go to a wedding with your wife? I mean, we wouldn't. And she says, yeah. He goes, when I pulled up there, his wife's girlfriend were commenting about how good looking he was. I thought, they had never met you? I said, explain to me. I'm not understanding this or whatever. He goes, oh, no, my wife and I, we had an arranged marriage. We were betrothed to each other when we were 10 or 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, I don't want to proselytize and get into the whole Bible thing, but this is so cool. I said, dude, I was just reading about Jacob and how he had to, he had an arranged marriage, and he had to go back to get his daughter, the girl, and he had never met her, and to talk to Diamond, he really loved and adored his wife. I mean, it was, and I thought about just how opposite that is to us in our country. And I'm going, Dad, you're not picking out my wife. I don't really care, no. But they did it, and I said, 6,000 years later, they're still doing this stuff, and I'm like, how cool that. And again, it's different, but it's real, and it's not a forced thing or a fake thing, because I think the idea is, I mean, I know I've got a 19-year-old granddaughter, and I see some of the relationships she picks out, and I'm going, yeah, no, bad, but that they still do that today. That there are parts of the world, and so to accept that and embrace that culture, yeah, they're different than us, but they're not really that different.
One of the things that stood out to me, I was talking in the first hour about the horse soldiers. I don't know if you heard that piece or not, but I was talking about one of these guys that was actually in one of my classes that I taught in an MA program. So I picked his brain for an hour and a half one day, the first guy's into Afghanistan. And I asked him this very question. I said, so what about the cultural background? How important is it to know somebody's language or culture? And he begins to speak to me in Arabic. I mean, he was fluent. Mm-hmm. I said, how did you become fluent? He said, I married a Jordanian woman. So here's this guy who wants to become a church planter in the United States, who's seen 3 tours, Iraq and Afghanistan, married a Jordanian woman and speaks Arabic.
But you have to understand everything about the culture, because there are little subtleties that I learned while I was over there. You only shake with the right hand, and you never even look at the woman. It's just. And you have to accept those things, because you got to remember, we were over there to help them to crush the Taliban and to set them free and stuff, but I still have to respect their cultures, whatever that may be. I don't have to necessarily agree with it. That's okay. It's not my culture. It's not America. And I can't make them America. I think that's been one of our fallacies, that we think somehow we can go spread this American ideal everywhere. Well, not everybody's going to want it, but to be able to do the little things, like I mentioned Diamond, he offered me something to drink. Well, in their culture, that is a very taboo thing that you would say no. So, it's like a slap in the face.
Okay.
So if they offer you a meal, same thing. A meal is an incredibly important time in their culture, much like it was back in biblical times. You read in the Bible, breaking bread together. Well, it's a very friendly expression to be together in that sense.
It's so important. I even think about the neighborhood I live in, or the city I live in, or the state I live in. We all come from these cultural backgrounds, and we need to give lots of people space and grace, don't you think, about how we treat them?
Absolutely, because the fact that I live in an area in Zionsville, and people are moving into the neighborhood, and I mean there's Pakistani, there's Indian, there's Chinese, there's Korean, there's a couple of Caucasians, but it's all over, and I'm just going like, they do things differently, they dress differently, they have different decorations on the outside of their house, but yet I see them putting up Christmas trees, and so I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I'm only. From my dad's side of the family, both of my grandparents came here from Germany in the late 1800s. So I'm only second generation American. I'm not, so I don't have this idea somehow that I'm the best because my grandparents came here because they wanted that American ideal, that freedom. But they brought some of the cultural things here with them. But there are other cultural things that, from my grandfather's perspective, were absolutely taboo. He never taught my dad how to speak German.
Okay.
He taught him a few phrases, but he said, "We're Americans. You speak English in the house."
Wow.
So it just depends. I mean, but I love all the ethnicity. I think it's awesome.
It is. It is fun, isn't it?
When I travel around the country or even around the world, I want to eat the ethnic food that's there. I want to know what's that like. What does that taste like? How's that? I wouldn't go to New Orleans and order a steak. Like, no, you're down there for some jambalaya, some gumbo, and
that's it. Yeah. Yeah, our Germanic heritage connection here. We should maybe exchange sauerbraten recipes or something, right?
There you go.
My mom's chuckling right now as I say this. Yeah, this cultural issue and the connection to people's backgrounds is a big deal. Well, we talked a little bit about this in the first segment of our piece about esprit de corps in the military, or frankly in any organization. I want to come back to that again and talk about how important is it that you've gone through, you still are obviously Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, but this esprit de corps that we should bring into any organization, whether we've served in the military or not. How important is that in a culture? So connect esprit de corps to the importance of culture.
It's critical in the idea that it's a sense of belonging. It's provides a sense of ownership to people. It's a common goal. We're focusing. So whether it's a church, or whether it's a private business, whether it's a neighborhood, why do I want to be connected with my neighbors and stuff? Well, for safety reasons, because we want to keep the neighborhood looking nice. We want our property values. We want our kids to be safe. in a church because I want to be able to spread the gospel, and I want to treat others kindly, and I want to welcome others who are outsiders, and in an organization because I have a common goal of whatever that organization is trying to achieve. I need to be able. So that camaraderie, we need to build that together, and sometimes doing silly little things. At my work, we just had a thing where we did a bowling outing as a division. It was 100 and some people, and we all went bowling. I'm not a big bowling fan, but some of the guys are huge bowlers. But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was, and I talked to people, and I met people that, even though I see them daily, I don't really interact with them a whole lot because my job is very different than what they do. But it gave us that time to be together to have that. So it's critical that we learn to have that camaraderie together, because you will learn things about people. Like you mentioned our friend Matt. I had no idea the guy played guitar. I got to go check that out now.
That's right. Hey, we're giving you a shout out there, Matt. We're going to come up to Noblesville and see you on Thursday night, man. Yeah, the issue of people's backgrounds and getting to know them. You mentioned bowling, and I have to just mention this book because it's such a big deal about 10 years ago called Bowling Alone. I don't know if you've seen this.
No, I haven't.
It's actually a sociological study done by a preeminent sociologist who said that our individualism is really not only corrupting our communities, but it really is distancing us from each other. And so this idea that we would go bowling alone instead of going bowling with 100 other people, and the community necessary for that. Talk about that a little bit and the importance of, we're individuals, but we shouldn't be individualistic in that sense of things.
Well, I think that's one of the I'll say evils potentially of social media.
Yeah.
Because I can become isolated. All of my friends are only what I know over the internet. And my pastor made a great statement one time. He says, I have people come up to me that say that they know me because I'm connected to them on Facebook. He goes, you don't know me. He says, you know what I let you see.
That's right.
He says, but you don't really know me. And it's so true that it gives us this shield to put up this false facade. And I think it's because we're afraid that people are going to look at us like we're so different. But as I meet more and more people, we are so alike and so similar. We have the same problems. Okay, yeah, your problems may not be exactly mine, but guess what? I guarantee you that within the church I go to is probably 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 members. I don't know how big it is, but I guarantee you there's probably 1,000 people that have the almost exact same issues that I have. At least some of them.
Yeah.
So, and whether like I said, a neighborhood or a church, a business, whatever it is, people just need to be open up to the ideas of, you know what, we're all flawed, imperfect human beings who need salvation.
Isn't that the truth? I tell students this all the time, that our problems are not ethnic, they're not linguistic, they're not sexual, that it's all human problems. So the problems that we face are endemic to humanity. So the problem really begins with Genesis chapter 3 and focusing folks and ourselves actually back to the beginning of where all of this started. And then understanding, as you've well stated earlier, that the only salvation that we get, that we can have, is through the grace of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do is a lot of young guys that I know who are getting married, even young women, that we pass cards around our office. And my saying that I write to them is always the same thing I write inside the card. Your marriage will not last if you are not selfless with your love.
Oh, wow.
Because it is too easy, because to me, they say pride is the greatest sin. Well, I think pride and selfishness are right. So when I think that people say, well, what's the greatest cause of marriage destructions? Or well, it's money, or it's an affair, or no, it's selfishness. I want what I want.
Yes.
I don't care what you want. I want what I want. So you're not making me happy. So, and it's the same way I think within the rest of our world, and it breaks down those barriers in basic training. It's so funny in basic training. They make us all look, I think, as dorky as possible. They shave our heads. We all have this peach fuzz on our head. We're wearing these gray gray sweatshirts that don't really fit initially, and none of us know how to really dress right. So we all look like idiots. And I think that's an intentional thing, to break us all down. And so when they tell us that they brainwash us in the military, yeah, it's a good thing, because they scrub out a lot of the junk, the prejudices, the biases, the selfishness, because you're taught to work as a team.
Yeah.
And if you don't succeed as a team, you all fail.
Yeah.
You're only as fast as the weakest man. You're only strong as the weakest link.
All of that matters. When you're talking about these things, the only thing that I think of over and over again is that the Christian view of life and things is others-centered. It's not self-centered. So many other philosophies or views of life and things really focus on what can be done for me, or meditating on whatever it is that's concerning for myself. Whereas the Christian view is you cross the railroad tracks and help somebody else out.
Well, and the golden rule, it's not do unto others as they. It's not I'm going to do to you what you did to me. It's no, how do I want you to do to me? How do I want to be treated? That's how I want to treat others.
Sure.
Do I expect to have mercy extended? It's funny when I talk about selfishness. It's one of the things I always think about is when I do something wrong, I want mercy. When you wrong me, I want justice.
Isn't that always the way?
And that's a very selfish attitude. Why should I not think about the idea? No, why don't I extend that mercy, extend that hand and say, hey, you know what? That was a bad thing, but you know what? I forgive you, brother. Love you anyway.
Yeah, boy. Just picking up and going on to the next thing. I mean, how important that is and how difficult it is for all of us. When we think about esprit de corps and the concept and connection to not only military but organizations, our churches, and so on, I got to straight up ask you about the Corps. What would the Marine Corps want Americans to remember this Memorial Day?
Just to remember the fact that they are all people, and even though you'll read potentially bad things about the Marine Corps, and people put them on pedestals, like we do a lot of things. We put things on pedestals. They're human. They will fail. They will fall. They will do something wrong. And remember that if you haven't been in their shoes, if you haven't walked in those shoes, be careful about how harshly you judge them. I've read lots of different articles, in the newspaper about how things are reported, and then I actually hear from the actual people who were there. Troops in combat. If you've never been in combat, and I have not actually been, even though I was in Afghanistan, I did not serve in a rifle company. I wasn't out there with 80 pounds on my back, trying to hunt the Taliban down. I didn't do that. I have a great respect for those people who do that, but I also give them a lot of latitude with the idea of what did they do and what did they see. To know that potentially I saw one of my best friends shot and killed right next to me. How would I don't know. I've never been there. How would I react to that? And knowing the fact that I just can't stop. I don't get to just time out. Sorry, I'm done. No, I gotta go on because there's another buddy to the right of me who's expecting me to keep fire on where I need. So how do I do that? And I think that what we really want to know is the fact that they're people. They deserve to be thanked for the service that they do, but understand that they are human and that they're going to fall, they're going to fail, and respect them by doing the little things that you can do. One of the things that's really an annoying thing to me is when I see people not paying attention during the national anthem. That is to me the ultimate in disrespect to service members. Because you're actually saying that your time is not worth it. Your attention is not worth it for those minute and 30 seconds or whatever it is that we play the national anthem. It's like, really? You can't wait that long? I taught my granddaughter that from a very early age, going to baseball games.
Nice.
I would make her stand perfectly still and look at the flag. And I wanted her to understand, you need to understand, that flag represents something terrific. It is short of Jesus Christ in this world, it's the greatest experiment in government ever. I said, and you should respect that ideal, not pay homage to it, not bow down to it, but respect it.
Sure. This brings me back to something that I want to make sure to talk about before we leave today, and that is, as we were having this conversation over coffee a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about things. And I asked you about the issue of pacifism and folks who don't want to fight or think that warfare or military is wrong or bad or whatever. You told me then that there are 3 different groups of people in the world. Tell us about who those groups of people are and why they are so important.
To me, the 3 different groups of people are sheep, which is a great analogy. I love that because sheep are the Bible quotes that a lot. We are his sheep, because sheep are probably about and I don't mean to say this in a generalized term of people all over,
sure, of
but
course.
sheep are dumb animals.
Yeah.
And we as fallen humans, we do a lot of stupid things, and we just kind of walk into dumb paths. Well, that's exactly what a sheep does. He doesn't know any better. There's also things, sheep dogs. And what is a sheep dog's job? I got to guard the sheep. I got to protect them. And who am I protecting them from? The wolves. Because there are wolves out there. There are evil people out there who want to do bad things to innocent people who really aren't doing anything. Whether they want to rob them or rape them or cause a war or terrorize them or blow them, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But you need the sheepdogs. And to me, the sheepdogs are the military and the first responders. We are the sheepdogs. And most people out there are probably more the sheep. You know, you have, you know, in my simplistic logic, 10% sheepdogs, 10% wolves, and about 80% sheep. You know, but the fact is that the sheep will be terrorized by these wolves. So the sheepdogs, they put their lives on the line, and they go after the wolf for any sheep. Just as, you know, I love the analogy. You know, Jesus said, you know, if you lose one sheep, you go hunt that thing down, you go find it, and you rejoice when you found it. The military, I think, does those same kind of celebrations. And first responders, when they go into an event with the police, with a SWAT team, and it comes out good, you know, nobody got hurt, we resolved the situation, captured the bad guy, whatever, they're extremely proud of that event because they did exactly what they were supposed to do. When we can go in and liberate a people and set them free and stop the bad guys from doing bad stuff, that's a great thing.
There it is, right there. I mean, when I think about this, HB, we're getting to the end of the program here. I just want to thank everybody for listening, and specifically when you're celebrating Memorial Day this weekend, remember the folks that have served, the folks that are fallen. Don't take it lightly. Stand up straight. Listen to the national anthem. Take off your hat. Put a hand over your heart. There it is. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
And remember, good people, and thank you, John, for gracing this RadioNext.tv studio. And remember, if you see someone in the military this weekend, sometimes the best thing you can do is just say thank you, and that is the most rewarding gift that we can give to our brothers and sisters who guard this country and have made us great.
Yes.
Great show, man.
Thanks, HB.
As always, we'll talk to you next week, Wednesday, 10 a.m., 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Warp and Woof Radio Show. And stay tuned. 10 Point Coalition is coming in, trying to save the neighborhoods, and they'll be at 12 and 2 p.m.